Welcome to my computer screen. I know it seems like I'm on yours, but I think from my perspective, you're on mine.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. So, have you talked to Paul? Are you going to be on his show? Has that been arranged?
Yeah, I'm in a couple weeks.
Excellent. And I know that Christopher Masterpietro is going. He's going to be talking to Paul this week.
Fantastic.
So I think Tuesday. I think so.
Yeah.
That's really good. That's really cool.
I'm looking forward to it. I actually only live about an hour and a half away from him.
From Paul?
Yeah, I'm in Berkeley, so I think he's in Sacramento, so it's like an hour, 15 minutes or so of a drive up there. So hopefully I'll actually be able to experience him in 3D.
Yeah, I hope I get to meet him. There's a chance I might be going out to California at some point, and maybe I can visit a bunch of people when I'm out there. So that'd be cool.
Sweet.
So I'm glad to see that your stuff is catching fire, and that's really good.
Yeah, totally. It's going to be interesting. Well, it has been interesting for the last 20 years, but it's funny. I'm getting a little bit of a taste of more. I think on some level I've had a taste of this, but just this particular wave of being a public figure of some kind.
Yeah,
is a real interesting thing.
Yeah, I know. It's very different. It's very different. Yeah, for sure.
So just to have people be making comments about you that don't necessarily have you in consideration of it. It's just whether or not it's positive or negative or neutral. It's just a strange experience.
Yeah. Well, that's what I meant when I said about how that triggers sort of social phobic experiences of exposure, or for lack of a better term. It's very much the case. I really liked the Rebel Wisdom thing. I hope you were happy with it, because I thought they captured you and your thinking very, very well, very, very clearly.
Yeah.
I thought it was handled very, very nicely. I mean, I like the way David became particularly personally involved in that discussion. I thought that was very, sort of courageous on his part. Because he's quite capable and good at sort of at an intellectual level entering into dialogue and discourse, but he clearly wanted to interact with you at a deeper level, and so that came through really, really clearly. I really thought it was very good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed him. He actually came out. He came out and did another interview live together.
Oh, is that going to be part of the series as well?
I think so.
Oh, that's excellent. Well done. That's great.
Edited it and stuff like that, but it was good because he actually came to one of our circling events.
Oh.
Drop-in events, and so he got circled and he got to experience the whole thing, and we did the interview before that. So really good. It was really good. He had just come back from Burning Man. So
okay, I've never been to Burning Man, but I've of course talked to people who have come back with really kind of zapped by it. So yeah,
I'd be interested to hear your take on what Burning Man is. It's a phenomenon that I think actually, if you experienced it, given all of the frames that you've set up, right, and the distinctions that you've made, especially given the sense that, because basically if you look at it, what's Burning Man? Well, first there's nothing, literally. Nowhere.
Right.
No trees or anything. And then for no particular solid reason, 150,000 people show up and build a city and burn a man
right
at the end of that week. And really, they have different themes about what the man means, but actually the man, part of what makes it Burning Man is the man doesn't really mean anything in particular.
Right.
And so in so many ways, it seems to be this full enactment, right, of like participatory knowing.
Right.
That doesn't actually have it's precisely what it is because it doesn't have any propositional claim.
Right. That's cool. Right. There's no sort of paradigmatic assertions that people have to adhere to or anything like that.
And
That's
that's
interesting.
woven into the fabric of it. And people show up. In my view, it's changed. I first went to it in 1995, right? And in fact, I went to it, and I didn't even know until I went back to it 4 years later that that's where I was, a long time ago. And I think now it's gotten pretty commercialized in a lot of different ways. So it's some of its luster for a lot of people is really broken down. I haven't been there since 2012, but I was already seeing that a little bit.
Right.
However, I think it really does speak a lot to what you're highlighting.
Yeah, I've thought about that. It would even be interesting going there as sort of a participant or observer kind of thing, almost anthropologically, to see that. Maybe that. I mean, so after I do the After Socrates series, I have another series on the God beyond God and reinventing the sacred, and so that might be a good excuse to go there and film that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The God beyond God.
And the reinvention of the sacred.
And the reinvention of the sacred.
Yeah.
Is that the Socrates series?
No, the Socrates series is coming next. So that the one I mentioned to you, the After Socrates series, right? So After Socrates, the cultivation of wisdom and meaning through authentic dialogue. That's the next series. So that's I'm just nailing down who the crew is going to be. I'm doing a lot of the initial research right now. So I'm planning on that being sort of a 20 video series, 20 videos, 20 episodes. And sort of like I said,
shorter this time.
Yeah, making it shorter. And what I want to do is I want to, like I said, I want to zero in on work like you're doing and the work I see Peter doing and this work, all this, the stuff I even saw at Stoicon on Sunday. Where there's this whole authentic discourse movement, and I think it is so Socratic in a lot of the ways it's functioning and the ways it's starting to represent itself. And what I want to do is I want to take that and put it into dialogue with some of the really, really excellent work that's just coming out now on re-understanding Platonic dialectic, re-understanding Socratic and Lincus, and set up a dialogue between those. And as I mentioned to you, this idea that originally was sparked for a discussion I had with Jordan Hall, that's where I see something like the meta-psychotechnology that shepherds the ecology of practices for responding to the meaning crisis. And that's what I want to explore, because that's basically the function that dialectic had in the whole Neoplatonic ecology of practices. Right? Dialectic was always the sort of meta-psychotechnology for coordinating all the other practices. And so it's always talked about simultaneously with the highest regard and the most frustrating lack of clarity. Like when you're reading the ancient literature, it's like, oh, but of course, dialectic, and what? But what is it? How do I do it? And so trying to get very clear on all of that. And then, of course, put that all into dialogue with all the emerging cognitive science about cognition, sense-making, meaning-making, distributed cognition, flow states within distributed cognition. A lot of the stuff that you and I have been talking about, that's going to be at the core of the new series. And like I said, I really want to focus it in also on the figure of Socrates, because I want to try and tap into what Pierre Hadot talked about, how the figure of Socrates serves this symbolic function that you don't get just with a theoretical representation of these ideas, configuring it around a figure who you can then interact with, at least within the fictional world of the dialogues and other like that gives it a kind of presence and power that a purely theoretical representation won't do. So that's exactly why I'm going to do that. And then the third reason is my personal commitment to Socrates as a hero, and the way I see, for example, on Sunday, Stoicism is all about internalizing Socrates as the sage you internalize as a fundamental way of life. And so again, the way this is taking off as a movement is again something I want to bring in. So I can also speak to it from my own personal commitment and what the figure of Socrates has meant to me. So those are sort of the three things I'm going to bring in. So, I mean, your work, maybe I'll even have you come in and talk at one point if you're up for that. You're right. Yeah, very much right. Is going to be in that new series. And like I said, some of the stuff I see with the Stoic movement, other practices, though, I hope to talk to some of the people who are, involved with authentic relating, and there's.
Yeah. There's a well, a couple things. So one is I've just been enjoying the ongoing kind of text dialogue that we've been having.
Me too, very much. I mean, that last one we had where we were just these huge texts back and forth to each other. I found that was so good. I was talking to David Chapman today. He's doing a lot of work. We sort of discovered each other. He's done a lot of work on the meaning crisis and what he calls the problem of meaningness. And we're gonna start exchanging Socratic letters to each other. Peter Lindbergh set this all up. But I was saying to him, and I hope for some charity on the part of people who might listen to this, that this is not meant to be elitist, but I hunger for peers who I can talk to about this stuff. And, so being able to talk to you about this, I get a thought and I can just text you and you do the same with me. And it's that sense of erudite company in the project it's so nurturing. I find it so beneficial. It's so good.
Well, precisely. I think one of the benefits and the nature of it is really interesting because there's such a, well, I'll put it to you like this. So I texted you after one time and you texted me back and my wife was sitting there, right?
Yeah.
And it was about you. It was, I think after listening to the Rebel Wisdom video.
Right.
And you'd said, "Oh, I love the distinction you're making between curiosity and wonder." And you went on about in that distinction that came out a few episodes later.
Right.
And I read it to my wife Brianne, and she started laughing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that is like the best text that you could ever receive. Somebody she was just ecstatic, overjoyed, because she's like, I'm just glad that you have a friend.
Yeah. Well, yeah, me too.
The depth to that for me, that is really it's super heartfelt. And I would say it's a particular kind of love.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? An explosive, it's different than something like unconditional love, right? Where unconditional love is just that sense of no matter how you turn up, no matter what happens, I love you deeply, right? It's not like it's not that, but it has a different quality of oh my God, I love you for this.
Yeah, no, that's going to be in the nenext series, right? The philia that's at the core of philosophia, and how philosophia is different than philia Nikeia. Instead of that shared love, right? For wisdom, as opposed to the pursuit of victory, right? And it's I'm trying to struggle here. It's a different kind of thing. I know it's often translated as friendship love, and that's a word that comes to mind, but it's not the same thing as friendship. There's something else. And you and I were sort of talking about that in that text conversation. I was trying to say, what I was trying to say. I see what's going on in circling, but when you and I are talking, sometimes it's not just the circling; it's the philia. That is also there's a shared directionality. We're in co-pursuit of something, right? And that's what I see philia as capturing. Right, and I almost want a different metaphor rather than the circling metaphor. I want a this metaphor, right? That we're caught up in this stream together, That's well, at least that's how it seems to me.
That's very well said. You know, what's interesting for me is there's a quality to it, right? And like what you're saying, it's not just you and I
Yeah.
having thoughts and feelings and experiences of just each other in this kind of circular
Yep.
Interaction. It's not just personal intimacy.
That's right.
There's a way in which we're sharing a horizon.
Yes.
But part of the sharing, I think, is something like the experience of realizing that we're sharing.
Yes.
And that in that realization, it's like as if we kind of come to aware that we're walking together facing the thing that we can't quite put words to.
Well, that's it, right?
That comes down back, and that's where I think it hermeneutically circles back around, because it reveals the ground and the.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I feel like there's a third partner, right, where the space of intelligibility is also like it's playing a vital role. It's disclosing itself, and it's affording, right, the dialogue in an important way. And right, so it's not only that there's this reciprocal realization happening between you and I, there's a logos that's happening between you and I that's in reciprocal relationship with this sort of field of intelligibility, because it feels more. You know, there's a great Latin word for this, inventio, which covers both invention and discovery. It feels like that. It's not something we're inventing. We're not just discovering it the way you discover that your table is 5 feet long or something like that. It's more like, you know, it hangs between being an invention and a discovery. But that's what I also see in the Platonic dialogues, right? The dialogos. There's the way of the logos by means of the logos, right? And so that's again what I'm trying to, what I want to get clearer on, and that's why, you know, I feel like burdened you last time. I was just sending you these long texts because I was struggling to try and articulate this together.
Hey, go 1 second. I just was aware my plugger got unplugged thing before we. You know, and there's something about where I kind of got something, the impact, you know, so on one level we're talking about, you know, our connection.
Yeah.
I think at the same time, you can kind of hear this horizon of where we're also talking about something that happens, a phenomenon that happens, right?
Yeah. There's a coming into the dialogue from, I mean, the spatial metaphors can be very misleading, so I'm depending on your charity here, but there's a sense of something coming into the dialogue from outside the dialogue, right? It's coming in, right? And that's why I like the horizon, in the sense that the horizon is also connected to the affordance of the ground that suddenly opens up in front of you so that you can walk forward, right? And that reminds me again, of course, of Plato's idea of you're coming out of the cave, right? You take a step forward, you're blinded by the light, but then your eyes adjust, and then you can see ground that you couldn't see before, so you can move forward. Then something hits you again, and you're blinded again. Your eyes accommodate, you can now see new ground again, and that's how you do the anagoge. That's how you move out. And I feel like that's what's happening when we're in this discourse, right? You know, there's something happens, and then there's a light comes in, right? We're sort of, and then we accommodate to it. And that accommodation is what I'm trying to convey by it's coming from outside the dialogue. And then as we accommodate, we both simultaneously, right, see how to go forward, how to move forward. And that's a very, I think, central aspect to the Platonic dialogue that we have lost in we've lost in this more modern notion of the debate, right? Especially that the debate, and insofar as the debate has moved into, right, you know, the adversarial thing. You know, it's important for people to disagree. You watched the video with Paul and I. We disagree on a lot, but nevertheless, there was still that sense, right? That sense of, you know, like he'd have an insight, I have an insight. There's a sharing, and then things open up, and you move forward. And this is why I'm so excited, right? Well, first of all, it's great to have formed a relationship with you, but I'm so excited about like getting your work, for lack of a better term, your project. I don't know which project is more Heideggerian, so I'll say your project, right? So it's getting your project more into this marketplace, the corner of the internet, where people are really wanting to get beyond bullshit. And I mean, Socrates is the great master of overcoming bullshit, right?
Right. And bullshit being, for people who are kind of new to this conversation, you have a technical.
Yeah, very technical. So the sense I have, is deeply influenced by Frankfurt, and then some of my own work. So Frankfurt distinguishes between the liar and the bullshit artist. The liar depends on your commitment to the truth, that you care about the truth to affect your behavior. So the liar gets you to believe something, Susan loves you, that isn't true, because if you believe it to be true, that will change your behavior in very predictable, reliable ways. So that's why the liar lies, because it's depending on your commitment to the truth. The bullshit artist doesn't work that way. The bullshit artist tries to get you disinterested into whether or not something is true or false. Mm-hmm. And instead, and this is where I sort of I try and draw what I think was implied by Frankfurt. What I argue is the bullshit artist depends on the salience of the information, how catchy it is, how much it sort of like will earworm and weave its way in. And so the classic example I give of this is like a commercial, right, in which, you're watching somebody drinking alcohol and there's all these attractive people around them, and that's not true. It's not true. You go into a bar, you see desolate people, right? But that doesn't matter. In fact, they are depending on you smugly saying to yourself, I know that's not true, because that's where you put aside the question of truth. Mm-hmm. But then what happens is the stimuli are still super salient to you. There's all these attractive people. There's a liquid being drunk, right? The lighting is beautiful. And so you end up buying the alcohol precisely because it was salient, and salient in a way that has been disconnected from the pursuit of your understanding of the truth. And so and what's really important for me, Guy, about that, and how I see that relevant to the Socratic project is, right, because Socrates was involved with the natural philosophers who cared about the truth but didn't really get into the transformative aspects of it. And then the sophists, who were really good at manipulating salience but seemed to were sort of disconnected from the question of truth. And I see Socrates as trying to always keep those together so that we get transformative truth.
Right.
And why that's crucial is because this gets into sort of philosophical and cognitive reasons, but you can't lie to yourself. We use that metaphor, and I'm kind of very critical of that metaphor because it's a very misleading metaphor. Because first of all, you can't lie to yourself because you can't know something's not the truth. And secondly, beliefs aren't things you do, right? They're not voluntary actions. So you can't lie to yourself. But you know what you can do? You can bullshit yourself, because your attention, right, can be directed by you. You can direct your attention to something and make it salient. But the thing is, once something has been salient, it then tends to catch your attention. And so you can create this loop. You can participate in the self-organizing nature of attention and how it alters salience so that you get dragged into, right, buying that particular brand of alcohol, voting for this particular politician, right, all that kind of stuff. And so I see bullshitting as anathema to what we're trying to do here. And I see Socrates, precisely because he explicitly rejects both the natural scientists and the sophists, as wanting to find a way in which the salient seeking and the truth seeking are wedded together. And that's what I see all the authentic discourse. They're trying to provide an on-the-ground antidote response to the ever-increasing pervasive bullshitting in our society and in our psyches. And authentic discourse is a Socratic way of trying to address that. Sorry, that was a bit of a speech, but that's like that. This is really central, I think, to my understanding and appreciation of what's going on in things like circling and the other authentic discourse practices.
But wouldn't you say that you were, in a certain sense, in your as it even just right now, like when you said, "Forgive my speech," right?
Yeah.
I think you were highlighting that. Hey, I just gave you a lot of salience.
Yeah.
Right. However, the context in which you were giving that salience from was to highlight something in reality that was true, that was important.
Well, yes. I mean, that's exactly right. I'm trying to wed the salience of how I'm presenting the material to what I think what is an understanding of an important aspect of the way human connection, human communication, human communing even, because there's a fraudulent communing going on between you and the people in the alcohol commercial. It's like you're sharing a world, but you're not. There's no real world there that you're sharing together. And so I'm trying to get the salience of our discourse glued back together towards this sort of Socratic insight about, you know, a deeper understanding of what dialogue can be doing for us.
Right. Wow. Okay. So I'm really, well, a couple of things. One is I'm understanding the text even more, the text that you had sent me where we were talking about, where you were saying that, yeah, maybe what circling is, right, is possibly pointing to this meta psychotechnology for psychotechnologies.
Yeah.
Something essential that in your understanding of circling. And what I'm hearing is also very much similar to your understanding and experience of Socratic dialogue.
Exactly.
That any downstream psychotechnology that's developed, if it's upstream from these two things, where reality and salience are mutually fitted towards each other in a way that reveals more reality that can be salient to us.
Yes.
Seems to be the thing that helps. One, makes it transformative.
Yes, very much.
The participation. So it's not just knowing the end result of the information that you arrive at, but the other part of the knowing, I think, is something like what it took for you to have what that information was a dialogue that in some way changed the one knowing it. Right.
Totally. And this is an abiding theme of the Socratic and Lenkos. The dialogos is enmeshed with know thyself, Socrates' motto, right? And this is not, you know yourself in some sort of superficial autobiographical fashion. It's this kind of, right, get to the guts of the machinery of yourself. And you only get to the guts of something if you're engaged in, right, this project. I'm reading a book right now. It's by Moore on Socrates and self-knowledge, and he argues that this self-knowledge is inherently self-constructive. Like this is not a fully formed self that you're discovering. It's a self that you're actually constructing. You're bringing an intelligibility to it that, and here's where I'm really going to really play on this word, that realizes the self. Makes it more real, have an intelligible structure, and that's a hallmark of realness for the Greeks, and also makes it more understandable for you. And so that project of self-knowing, if we understand it as self-realization, and I want to hear something deeper than just the Maslow meaning of that, right? That's enmeshed with, again, what you and I were talking about the dialogos, how there's a logos that forms between us that unpacks the space of intelligibility. Because only by communing with that space of intelligibility can you internalize it into the intelligibility of the self, right? That's how the two are bound so deeply together.
Yes. And that when that binding, what I'm hearing you say is that when that binding reveals itself as the ground, that then reveals more of what even called the binding together in the first place.
Yes, very much.
That sense of, I really appreciated what you said in our first interview, and I've been noticing myself from the bottom up using a lot of these terminologies, and then recognizing it after the fact, which I want to talk about a little bit, because I think that's demonstrates the impact of these kinds of conversations that are more than just figuring something intellectually out.
No, that's right.
It demonstrates a kind of, in some way, through our dialogues together, I notice that in a pre-reflective way, I am putting things in terms that I hadn't used before without recognizing it until after the fact.
Well, I was keyed on something you said once, and you paused, and you sort of unpacked it a bit, and then you moved on. And maybe it was with David or some. I've watched some of your circling, but you paused on the notion of coming to terms, which carries with it exactly what you're talking about, like the coming to terms, bringing things to terms, to intelligible discourse. But there's also this sense of existential confrontation, and that you need to go through a transformation to, like when people say, well, you need to come to terms with this, means, well, you've got to change how you're relating and responding to this. So I really enjoyed that little thing you did around that phrase, coming to terms, because I thought, oh wow, that's a really succinct way of demonstrating in that phrase what you're talking about. I really appreciated that. I like that a lot, actually.
Totally. Oh, so glad. And one of the things I'm noticing in these, and this is where I get some interesting things about opening up about the conversations in the medium that they're taking place in, right? And how I actually am wondering about if, as you say, our little corner of the internet.
Yeah, right? That's Vervaeke King's term, which I think is just wonderful. That's another person I want you to eventually talk to, because her stuff on Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance and all the stuff she's trying to do around the metaphysics of quality, she and I had a really, really good discussion. Yeah.
I'll put a link to that dialogue. That was really great.
But I think she would get. I think you would find it mutually beneficial to talk. But go ahead. Yeah, our corner of the internet.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. My understanding of what Heidegger's, one of the things that Heidegger's really profoundly revealed, which it's stunning, that it's one of those things about, and I notice I'm attracted to thinkers that I have this quality with, which is they don't stop yielding that horizon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things in the last number of years that I've really come to appreciate about the way that Heidegger talked about this being an age of technology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right, and what he's not talking about, in my understanding, it's kind of to misread Heidegger if you think that he's talking about technological objects.
No.
What you're referring to is that every age has its understanding of being, right?
Yes.
The being of beings. In other words, everything that we can see, think, say, encounter is a being.
Right.
However, the one thing that can't become a being is the sense of beingness. It discloses in its in the way that beings show themselves, reveals and conceals its being, right? Mm-hmm. This kind of background, this moment. Yep. And what he said about, my understanding is what he said about the age of technology is that it's where it's not the Descartes sense of being as subjects standing over against objects. That's, like you could say, accounted for the Industrial Revolution, right? A mechanician, that kind of thing. What he said is like somewhere around World War II, especially when you get like, well, what is it that allowed for something like the Holocaust to happen, right? And I think that really struck him. And he's like, there is a different understanding of being, right, that's going on there. And I think it was connected to that and a bunch of other things. And where he started to realize, oh, we are in the age of techne. And the age of techne being that our understanding of that which is being is a standing in reserve.
Yeah, the standing reserve, yeah, very much.
Awaiting endless calculation and optimization of everything that is. And one of the things that what he talks about it, and it's really eerie to wake up to this, because part of the waking up to it is to be horrified that you weren't even asleep to it. It was so concealed to you.
Yeah, very much.
And so a lot of our current age, you could say, is, endless shopping malls, internet, right? The sense in which the only thing that the way beings show themselves to us now are just things for further optimization for their own sake, right?
Yeah, I agree. And this, the sense of the standing reserve is that their relationship to us is always one of service, right? They're always there, and we get this even on the idea of things being natural resources, right? That their fundamental ontology is how they stand in service to us. And I think Heidegger was right that is part of the problem with the ontotheological, because the idea of nature, of physis, ultimately being understood in its relationship of being in service to us. It exists only insofar as it's in service to us. I think that's also the fundamental, because the degree to which we see everything that way, and that I like Harman's point about this, right? Why should we think that half of ontology is us, right? That's right. Like that's such an arrogant sort of thing,
right?
And so you get Heidegger's whole exploration of physis is that which blooms without a purpose, without a why, that has no teleological, and it precisely has its being because it has no use for us, right? We can't find, well, how is that going to serve me? And his point is, it's precisely disclosing its being in how it is not going to serve you. And this is why I've sort of been trying to get to, I don't know. I want to tread very lightly here, but that there is, there's not. We've got to give up that there's got to be a grand cosmic teleology, that everything is in some sense service to us. First of all, I just think that does not comport well with the way the cosmos is clearly laid out, with 99.9% of it having absolutely nothing to do with us, both in time and in space, right? So I think that's a ridiculous claim to make ontologically, but also because of what we've just said, the implicit idea that the being of things is their being in service to us is to lose the mystery, the depth, the way things withdraw their autonomy from us, right? I think that's, for me, the crucial message I'm getting out of this. And so I'm even trying to challenge gently, because I respect the people I'm in discourse with, I really do, but I'm trying to challenge the idea of understanding meaning as purpose, where purpose is this service, right? This service to our telos, our goal, our projects. It's like, no, if connectedness to being, right, and ultimately to the ground of being, to sacredness, can't be a relationship of just how does that thing serve my goals.
Yes.
Right? Sorry, but that I feel very strongly about this, because I think that's this, for me, that's what I take from Heidegger's notion, the idea that the being of something is its being in service to me.
Right. Totally. And what I'm saying about, like, a couple of things is, like, I have in the years of circling and doing it and cultivating it and trying to figure out how to teach it, which is, all of it has been, I would say, an experience of the opposite.
Yes, very much.
Opposite of the collapsing of all distances, right?
Yeah.
Which is, if you look at, like, the more technological something it is, the more it collapses distances.
Sure.
One of the things that Heidegger, I think, really points out is this interesting paradox, which that which is most concealed is that which is most near,
mm-hmm.
right? And so technology, and if you notice, it's literally getting nearer and nearer and nearer, right? It's like, was it
Elon Musk, with the chips. Yeah.
You can kind of understand, like, well, what made it possible to disclose, have things appear in such a way that, like, even my brain, right, becomes something that I can see. How can we collapse the distance between my brain and my brain, basically?
Yeah, you're right.
And what's interesting about that is that what that And I think what you're talking about is that what that ends up concealing is, one, is the notion of concealedness itself.
Yes.
As
we identify with our technology. Yeah. Like if you touch my clothing, I get offended because I'm so identified with it. So please continue.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's kind of like if you just give another like concrete analogy. Imagine tomorrow you woke up and imagine it was 1970s, right? It was 1970, and you woke up and you still thought it was 1970, and then you went to the BART station or the bus stop, and then you watched everybody at the bus stop just
right.
Look and not looking up, and everybody passing each other, and everyone doing it, and then no one having. Here's the eerie part: is that no one having a conversation about that. What we're doing. You probably have thoughts like, "Oh my God, it got us," right?
Yeah.
It took us.
There's some totalitarian regime that has somehow inseminated it's wiretapping, and it's all around us, and we've succumbed. Yeah, that's very much the case. Yeah, so I get that. So there's very much, to use a Polanyi term, the technology is transparent to us. We see through it and beyond, and by means of it and beyond it, and we're losing the capacity to stand back and look at it. Yeah. And so, I mean, like here I am in my apartment, and all of the objects around me are here because they're in service to me.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm not even, if I hadn't been, reading Heidegger or in this discourse, would I even notice how much I've lost the sense, right, of, because the only way I tend to experience things not being in service to me is frustration.
Yeah. This is
why Socrates again, philosophy begins in wonder. Wonder is the sense of, oh wow, that has an existence above and beyond me, but I'm not experiencing that as frustration that the things aren't serving me. I'm experiencing it as no, ultimately I have to fit into this. I have to resituate myself to this. I have to accommodate to this. It puts a demand on me. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And our demand that it be immediately intelligible for it to be valid is I think is starting to define a whole age. I mean, we now have kids that this is really interesting to think about. We now have like a whole generation that doesn't have a memory before the internet.
Yeah, I know. And so the internet, the internet by every standards of the ancient world is a god. It's omnipresent. It gives advice. It provides massive amounts of information. It directs you. It gives all these normative standards because you're judged by the community of the internet if you say or do the wrong thing. And yet, right, although that's the case, that it is very much a god for us, the potential for idolatry, the potential for narcissism, because that's, again, when everything's in, if God is ultimately in service to you, that's the ultimate narcissism, right? And so all of that is transparent to us in a really telling fashion. So I think, I mean, you can see how, there's all these themes, well, not all of them, that's too grandiose, but many of the themes we're touching upon now here, they're right in that Socratic milieu, right? Socrates is bringing them all up, right?
In fact, he actually frustrates, like he actually, like I thought when you said frustration, he actually frustrates the people in the dialogue
who command easy or demand or pretend to have, ready-made intelligibility. So, I mean, if you look at the dialogues, they're often pitched that way. There'll often be two people. Gonzalez does a really great job of this in his book, right? They'll like, in the Lyceus where he's talking to the two generals. And so what you get is you get one person who represents the authority of intuition. I just know what courage is. I just know it. I can just speak it, right? And then you get on the other side, you get the student of the sophist who's captured some dialogue, sorry, not some dialogue, that's exactly the wrong word, who's captured some slogan or phrase, not within dialogue, he's just heard it from the sophist, and now he has the definition. And so Socrates is rejecting both the intuitive, I know, and the I've defined it, I've got the final definition. And he's frustrating both of those claims to an easily accessible intelligibility.
Right. And that process of enduring that frustration and returning to that, I know in Socrates, is continually returning to the not knowing.
The aporia. I mean, that's what Socrates induces. And he's compared to a stingray or a magician, because you get caught up and you don't know. Think about what we were talking about earlier. You don't know how to go forward, because you can't go forward until you're willing to commit to a transformation.
Yes, and that which you can commit to, right? That which, if you commit to it, can be transformative in the act of committing to it. I think whatever that is, cannot be optimized.
What do you mean by that?
In other words, it does not reveal itself as standing in reserve.
I see.
Right? Awaiting my calculation. Because and this is one of the things I think that you're talking about, I believe, which is, and bring us back to the medium that we're in right now, right? Our little corner of the internet. I think it's unique, and I think Rebel Wisdom's doing this. I think you're doing this with your series. I think this is an example of this. Is a place where actually technology is offering not something that leads to further enhanced technology, but rather it's delivering something inherently untechnological, right? Called conversations that are difficult, right? That conversations that don't collapse distances.
And that, I would add, are viewed as useless by a lot of people, because where's the bottom line? Where's the conclusion? Who won? All of those questions are, they're being so deeply frustrated that they're even being marginalized in what's happening between us right now. There is a joint philia in us, in that they are not going to be the constraints, the telos under which we are governed in our discourse right now. And I think that's really important.
Yes. And that's something about that, when that mutual recognition of that we're both seeing that we're both seeing the teleotic relationship, right, as we're walking to it, that gives the ground. Yes. And we recognize that, without even quite knowing it in some way, we've been oriented to something beyond the horizon, and our conversations have walked us there. Yes. Then for the ground of our relationship reveals that unknowingness, that sense of the unknown, the moreness gets revealed.
Yes.
That in such a way that it has us deep in that ground, that opens us up to more novelty, of more of that infinite source of intelligibility.
That I try to capture that by making, talking about how wonder is picking up on the qualitative moreness, not just the quantitative moreness.
Yeah.
Right. So the quantitative moreness is, I gather more information, and I think that's more what curiosity is about. Whereas wonder opens me up to new kinds of information, new kinds of intelligibility. That's why wonder is so much more associated with awe and with insight. And so the way I try to do this, because what you're talking about, think about it. Think about the challenge of this for somebody who's a scientist, right? How I try to do this is I try to make a what can we have scientific theories about, and what can we not have scientific theories about? And I try to do this very carefully. And so I try to make an argument, I don't know if you've seen the episode or not, that we cannot have, there is no, and I mean this in an Aristotelian sense, there is no essence to relevance. There is no final representation. Or sometimes I'll use the very, and I mean this phrase to be shocking, there is no final solution to what is relevant, right? Because relevance is something that exists inherently as it's evolving, right? And you have to be careful about how the language misleads you. It's not that there's this thing that's evolving. It only exists in its evolution, like your biological fittedness was the analogy I used, right? It only exists as an ongoing, constantly evolving thing. So, if you'll allow me that analogy, there is no essence to other than you survive long enough to reproduce, which is just a formula, right? There is nothing that all the creatures that survive long enough to reproduce share that makes them fit. Some are big, some are small, some are fast, some are slow, right? There is no homogeneous set. There is no essence to fittedness. So Darwin can't give you a theory of fittedness. There can, by analogy, there can be no theory of what's relevant, right? But what Darwin does is he gives you an account of the dynamical system by which fittedness is constantly evolving. That's what I try to do with my relevance realization theory. Give a theory about how relevance is constantly evolving, while then explicitly arguing that there can be no definition, no essence, no final telos, no culminating point at which we say, now we have it, now it's finished, we've got relevance, and this is it. And that's, I think, also, to bring it back around, I think that's also part of the Heideggerian critique of ontotheology. There is no supreme being in the sense of the place, the entity wherein, right, relevance is finalized, completed, it comes to an end. And I think that was also part of Heidegger's note, at least that's Dreyfus's, right, part of Dreyfus's, right, critique. Reality is perpetually and irredeemably and forever and ever combinatorially explosive to us. And we can never exhaust it with our relevance realization machinery.
Yes. Right.
So that's how I try to put that together. Because the issue you're bringing up, Guy, is it's a challenge. And I don't want to shy away from it. It's a serious challenge for somebody who's ultimately a scientist. Because like, how do you work in? Sorry, my phone thinks I'm talking to it.
Scientists are calling you.
Yeah, the challenge of what can I bring? What is it? I'll use a stronger language. What is appropriate for me to bring the scientific project of rendering things theoretically intelligible? What is it appropriate for me to bring that to? And where does that very same framework tell me, no, this is something that, right, we have to talk about as not being capturable. Like I resist any, like I say, and I'm going to use this phrase again to be provocative, I resist any final solutions like this is the essence, right? I want to decouple the notion of sacredness from perfection, where perfection means the final, complete, finished, teleologically culminative, end to the whole project of relevance.
Yeah.
And say, no, sacredness is about the ongoing, inexhaustible fount of intelligibility, the moreness that we can never exhaust with all of our efforts of meaning making and sense making. It is the Tao, it's like the Tao. It is a well that we use, but we can never use up. And that never being able to use it up is precisely its sacredness, right? There's an aspect of it that was always not in service to us, but therefore always affords us to self-transcend.
Yes. Yes. And would you say that a part of what you're teasing out and eliciting, right, is showing how you can discover the machinery, right?
Yep.
And science, right? The
Yep.
propositional understanding and the corollary sense of truth, that you can reveal how even what science can reveal is oriented or can point towards and supports and is even in some way revealing to that horizon that can't ever be comported.
Totally. I mean, so this is where I am trying to argue that there is a way of talking about sacredness. So, by sacredness, I mean the experience.
Yeah.
And then the sacred is whatever the ontological ground of that experience is, right? So that science, of course, can talk about sacredness in terms of this relevance realization machinery. But it can also talk, it can tell us, right, that ultimately puts us into a participatory relationship with the sacred, where the sacred is something that I think is completely consistent with the scientific worldview, which is, again, the combinatorially explosive nature of reality. That, look, if you understand what relevance realization is dealing with, that reality is combinatorially explosive in terms of the options for action and the information available and the levels of analysis that are perpetually open to us, and that it's not a static thing out there. It's dynamic, and all of those things are dynamic and self-complexifying. And there's other people doing this work. Stuart Kaufman's doing work on reinventing the sacred, where he's trying to get let's get this new notion of the sacred as, right, as I put it, as the inexhaustible ground that is a perpetual fount of intelligibility. And this is why I like the Neoplatonic notion of the one, because the one is not itself intelligible. It is the never-failing source of intelligibility, but it itself resists all of our projects of intelligibility, precisely because it's the ground of intelligibility.
Right. Now, so there's this, what I'm really getting right now as we're talking is the orientation to that which is worthy of orienting to.
Yes, till its ultimate concern.
Right. The ultimate concern can't ever be summed up and grabbed a hold of in some final way, but that yet it is the source of inexhaustible intelligibility.
Right.
That's and that there's something innately healthy. And this is where I would imagine being human in particular, right? This is I'm interested to hear what you think about this. There's a way that the particular way that the human being opens to reality seems to be inherently that there's something very healthy about being oriented to that which you can't completely grasp.
I think so.
Like something about that sense of, I know, who is it? Maximus, the
confessor.
I think he said something. I heard this through the theologian, the modern theologian, David Bentley Hart, I think is his name.
Yes.
He's really something. But one of the things, he quoted Maximus, and I've been thinking about this ever since. He says, like, for Maximus, the professor, who I think he wrote in like the 700 AD. So
around then, I believe so, yeah. Or maybe a little bit earlier, I'm not sure. Jonathan Pajot talks a lot about Maximus too.
Very like grounded in Neoplatonism.
Very much so, very much. He's deeply influenced by Pseudo-Dionysus, very, very much.
And so what he said is that was that the ground of our being, or the being of human being, is an existential astonishment at the givenness of being.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In other words, it's like how I hear that is it's not like I'm a being that then can feel astonished at things. It's more what he's getting at is that the structure of my being, in my being, or you could even say, I would imagine, the openness of consciousness, right?
Right.
And its coupledness with the world, the ground of that openness itself is made of and presupposes the astonishment at the givenness of being.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. I mean, I'm reading a book on Maximus's theory of knowledge, and I'm reading a book also on John Scottus Erigena on all of this, partially because I'm trying to deepen my capacity to enter into a deeper dialogue with Jonathan Pajot.
Yeah.
So I can't remember, John Scottus makes use of a notion which I think Maximus uses, but Gregory Nissus definitely uses, which is epictasis. So the idea is not we don't come to a final resting place. So this is a standard model of sort of salvation and heaven and and the vision of God. But the notion of epictasis is no, God's infinity, to use the scholastic way of putting what we're talking about, but that doesn't mean a quantitative moreness like the infinity of a line. It means the qualitative moreness, right? God's infinity is the perpetual affordance of our perpetual self-transcendence. So we constantly, right, more and more of what we are is being revealed in the self-transcendence, and more of God is being, right, but the joy of it is not to have come to a final resting place, a telos. The joy of it is in, and I'll use a cog sci term here, the joy of it is the flow. We're in a perpetual, ongoing, increasing flow state. Yes. And that's what we're ultimately after, which I thought was that's a really, really interesting idea. And I would go to say towards your notion of health, right? And so this is, and I'm going to talk about this later in the series, when I talk about the divine double in work like Corbin and Jung and people like that, intellect, the relationship between the essential self and the existential self, right? So Agnes Collard has written a really beautiful book called Aspiration. And she talks about aspiration is when you want to acquire an identity and a set of values that you currently do not have, which means those values and identity can't be motivating and driving you. She gives the example of someone who wants to come to love classical music, who does not currently love classical music, right? She uses that as her thought experiment. And so she's not motivated by a love of classical music, and she's not motivated by an identity that is bound to classical music, precisely because that is what she lacks. But she wants to have that identity. So this is the process of aspiration, and you can't sort of compute your way through it and infer your way through it. But then she makes an astonishingly, what I think is a Neoplatonic point. She says, notice that if you say, I can't infer my way through that, I can't use sort of standard decision metric measures, right? Because I'm trying to acquire a value I don't have. I'm trying to acquire an identity I don't have. I'm trying to go through some kind of transformative experience, right? She says, if you say that's not rational precisely because you can't reason your way through it, right? And then I do a little bit of a riff on her work, but here's the riff I do to I think bring out her argument. If you say that that aspiration is not itself a rationally justifiable process, notice what a bind you're going to get into. Because one of the things we should aspire to? Being more rational. And if the aspiration to rationality is not something that in itself can be rationally justified, then rationality becomes this self-undermining process, right? It becomes this self-undermining demand on you. So she says, we have to extend the notion of rationality to include this aspiration. Now, here's where that comes back to your point. We have to be in relationship that has a demand on us to something that currently exceeds our value and identity in order to afford aspiration.
We have to, so we have to have a relationship that has a demand on us.
Yes.
Okay. That's
that comes from something that does not fit into our current value structure and identity, precisely because it can challenge us beyond our current values and identity to become something other than what we are. It is the only real affordance of real self-transcendence.
So there's a way in which, like, even just now in apprehending that, and I noticed as you were speaking it's interesting. I can kind of feel this sense of I'm right at the tip of something, right?
Yes.
And I am not like that. There's some way in which what we're speaking to is just to simply get closer to that which is we can't say in some final way.
Yes, exactly.
It does have a call. Like if you look at both of us, and if you just looked at this as two apes and you watch like what like what they're really after something. And what I'm hearing is that in some way, is it fair to say that like how I develop, right, as a person, as a human, as a individual, is one, it's an unending project, right? And precisely because it's the kind of project that that in its projectness, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In its projectness, is to constantly be open to being called upon by that which you are not yet ready to be.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm trying to use Callard to deepen Heidegger's notion of ecstasis, right?
Right.
Standing beyond yourself. And I think the moments where the ecstasis becomes really clear to us is when we are going through, well, the qualitative development, the pure self-transcendence. Look, when they have the awakening experiences, when they experience what I call when they talk about like these mystical transformative experiences and they encounter the really real, the term I've coined for talking about that is ontonormativity, right? Because what happens is, notice how this is the opposite. Notice how it's the opposite of everything. Normally, this is what we do. All of this is intelligible to me, and I have an altered state of consciousness, like a dream, and I say, oh, that's not real, because it doesn't fit into all this intelligibility. But notice with these experiences, exactly the opposite happens. They have this experience, and they come back and say, that was real, and all of this is less real. And I have to, there's a demand on me because of the really real. I have to transform myself, my world, my relationship, so that I can conform. I can conform to that really real more than I am conforming right now.
Yes.
That's what happens. And you know what? 30 to 40% of the population have these experiences, and we do not have the language, the tradition, the guides, the discourse, the communication patterns that give them any way to articulate, in both senses of that word, these experiences. So they happen like orphans.
Totally. And then what they end up being is, I think this is Jamie Wheel's latest kind of criticism of the psychedelic movement, is, I would imagine, is it fair to say that because we don't have a shared language anymore, that where it's sensible to open up to the mystery as is that which is most true, right? Most determinate and worthy of moving towards.
Yeah.
Because we have language around it, right? Yeah. And instead, what we're inside of is something like things being immediately intelligible to us based on...
And in service. Right? So you take this experience and it becomes a jewel for your narcissism. Yeah. And what you do is you place it on your autobiographical shelf and you point to it as evidence for your uniqueness and why you are deserving of attention, because you have a uniqueness that nothing else has.
Right. And so you put up posts saying like, right.
Yep.
Saying my shaman just went to this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And so it takes that real experience and it brings it into, and it enframes it.
Exactly.
And so what you're pointing to here is, okay, how do I'm hearing both restore, rejuvenate, and create and reveal the grammar that allows allows for us to open to those kinds of experiences, but in a way that actually deepens me in the ground that I am, and that I can share about it in a way that doesn't enframe it, and
it calls to you.
Yes, so it increases the call.
Right, and I'm picking up on your sense of hearkening.
Yeah.
That also was, I think, an excellent thing that came out in the, I believe it's the discussion you had with David
Yeah.
Fuller. That notion of hearkening, right? That that's calling you. I just picked Yaden's book, The Sense of a Calling, because he's done some of the work on the ontonormativity, the psychology, and he's got an anthology about that, because I want to understand this, and I see. And you can see you got the connection between your sense of hearkening, what's going on in circling, and what we've been talking about here. Can we communicate and commune such that we don't orphan these things and then fall prey to narcissistically clutching to them, but can we communicate with each other and commune with each other so that we facilitate that, that wonder, that opening up together? So, and then I want to understand how to do what I see in the Socratic dialogues. I see a lot of what we were talking about, the circling, but I also see, I see rational reflection, I see argumentation, I see discussion and debate, but the line of service has changed. All of that's in service of, the circling. But like I say, that's what I'm trying to get with this, right? I'm trying to get this idea of, that we can take something like the circling and we could bring into it what you see in the Platonic dialogues. Can we find in the circling a way, as Plato says, metaphorically, mythologically, I should say, so that we can recover the wings by which we can again ascend in anagoge, right? That's what I'm trying to see. That's what I'm questing for. That's what I'm sort of, as the friends we're becoming, that's what I'm probing you on. I'm trying to seeing how to put that together.
Yes. The
I don't mean to cut things off, Guy, but I have to go shortly, unfortunately.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, gotcha. How long do you have?
I have literally about 2 minutes, and then I got to go.
Okay, well, we'll continue.
Yeah.
On text, and I'm sure in other talks for sure as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I like the novel. I think this would be a never-ending thing that we have going, which is precisely exemplifying the very thing we're talking about.
Yes. It's nice. It's nice being called and calling you.
Yeah, very much. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to. Well, I'm doing everything I can to make people aware. And I understand what you're saying about the, there's the cost of exposure for that, but I think the value of what you're doing is important. So I want more people to know about it.
Yes, me too. Vice versa.
Okay, so thank you very much, my friend. And as you said, we'll be in ongoing communication.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.